This edition in the Line of Fire.
We have a large truck into the south side of the Capitol building with a large fire. This is Maureen at the Highway Patrol.
And it's actually hit the building?
It is into the doors on the south side of the building. It's a big rig.
Okay. Is anybody trapped?
Man, the whole thing is on fire. They've got to be trapped in the cab.
Thank you. On the way.
The flames were going from the ground all the way up to the roof, 3 stories tall. It was just a solid sheet of flames. And what I could see was, oh my God, Capitol's on fire.
Lessons learned by the men and women involved in the Line of Fire.
When a huge tanker truck roared into the nation's largest state capitol building and exploded into flame, every first responder thought of one word: terrorism. Hello and welcome to In the Line of Fire. I'm Don Marsh.
And I'm Ron Barber. This horror unfolded almost simultaneously with the announced execution date of Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. So, as 911 calls poured into Sacramento Emergency Dispatch, what were firefighters to think? It looked like a scene from an Arnold Schwarzenegger thriller. A tanker truck circling the state capitol building in Sacramento, gaining more and more momentum.
A semi-truck apparently circled the Capitol a couple of times, or some of the streets in that area. Went down 11th Street, headed in a northerly direction towards the state Capitol, and ended up driving across the grass at the Capitol and in between 2 of the columns.
One firefighter called it surreal, and caught on a Capitol surveillance camera, indeed, it did look ghostly and unreal, lurching over the Capitol grounds and plowing into the south side of the building.
Its radiator itself actually was sticking inside the window of the Capitol, approximately 8 to 10 inches, I would say.
Within seconds, an outside observer would probably have thought the entire Capitol was ablaze.
When the diesel ignited and the tanks leaked, the water or the fuel spread out all underneath the truck, going back towards the street and totally underneath the entire trailer, and then it slowly started to burn. And once that happened, then the entire vehicle became engulfed in flame.
911 calls erupted into Sacramento Regional Fire and EMS dispatch.
We are being advised that there are items in the truck that are exploding. It is fully involved.
Okay, I'll let us know.
The Capitol building is also involved. This truck drove into the building.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
We have a major fire at the Capitol on the south side.
We got it as a big rig into the Capitol building.
And there's a major fire going on now.
There's a fire over there on N Street by the Capitol.
Okay, what do you see?
It's big black smoke and it's...
And of course, with a rare nighttime legislative session dealing with the energy crisis, on the tip of everyone's tongue and mind was terrorism.
Reference to the fire that we have at the Capitol with the big rig. Can you tell me what's in the big rig? I think I heard explosives. Okay.
And it was sabotage. It was intentional.
Gut instinct quickly told the 4 or 5 dispatchers on that January night, this was big.
When you have incidences of a high important nature, you just kind of get a feel. There's a gut feeling just from the type of incidents coming in. And because we're a small communication facility, you pretty well hear what's going on. And after we take a call, if it's something that's going to pique our interest, a comment is usually made. It's sad that for us to exhibit our professional skills, somebody has to have a disaster. But we had a sense immediately that this was not the normal type of call.
The Sacramento Fire Department, as well as every nearby fire department, answered the bell.
Our CAT system is designed that we do not recognize the borders for equipment response. Equipment response is based on the closest units. A response list or a run list for a particular geographic location is 60 stations deep. So the closest unit is a response to the incident as opposed to the closest politically correct. The fire agencies do not protect their own district with their own units. They protect their district by all the resources that are available to them.
Now, with no boundaries, matter where the fire or whatever type of emergency it might be is located, you will get the closest apparatus to that incident, no matter what type of, whether you needed a truck company, an engine company, a boat, an ambulance, whatever, you would get the closest available piece of equipment.
The state capitol is in the downtown area of Sacramento, in the jurisdiction of Sacramento City Fire Department. The first alarm assignment was Engine 1, Truck 1, Medic 4, Engine 2, Truck 5, and Engine 5. So that took the core of the downtown area stations to the fire scene.
But the 3 engines and 2 trucks thrown at the inferno on the first alarm were just the beginning.
When I approached 9th Street, I could see smoke, and when I turned on N, which is the side of the street side where the fire is, I could see flames approximately 60 feet in the air, lapping against the upper stories of the Capitol building. All of our firefighters, based on their experience and training, and particularly what has happened in our society over the last few years, were all thinking potential terrorism. They were talking about it on the radio. I reminded the crews about it. I guess it's one of those things you're not sure you could do anything about it, but we all assumed, and probably rightfully so and smartly so, that we were going to deal with a terrorist incident. And so that's what cued me to say, okay, send the whole shooting match.
Engine 1, I would assume that this is intentional.
10-4, be careful, Engine 1. This is an impossible intentional sabotage. I'm concerned about our crews. I do have CHP here with me, and they're calling for a bomb squad.
But I truly, in my heart of hearts, thought the Capitol would burn down. And from the amount of resources that I requested, you can tell that that's what I thought was going to happen.
Dispatch Battalion 1, be advised, Engine 1 is on the N Street side of the Capitol. They have a big rig into the Capitol. The Capitol is on fire. I need a second alarm assignment.
Fire dispatch, copy. Second alarm assignment. Fire dispatch, Battalion 2, full be on.
I requested every available chief officer in the county. I immediately requested 4 alarms. I can tell you no time in my career that I remember that prior to arrival, just based on being a couple blocks away and seeing a picture that I saw that day, that I immediately request 4 alarms. I've been to many 4-alarm fires, but I've never said, I started out, I think, saying something like, give me 3 alarms. No, strike that. Send 4 alarms and send every available chief officer in the county. So that gives you, I hope, some idea of at least the level of seriousness that was going through my mind at the time. I immediately got on the radio prior to leaving the fire station, contacted dispatch, and gave the order to have the Capitol evacuated. Probably I didn't have to do that, but just for peace of mind for my own sake, the CHP officers had started the orderly evacuation of the Capitol. People were, in fact, leaving the building. And so that was my initial response. Make sure, have somebody confirm, get me a CHP supervisor, have somebody confirm that the Capitol is being evacuated. The other chief concern I had, obviously, was a secondary device that could potentially kill or injure my own people. No fire chief, I can assure you, wants to lose a firefighter on their watch. And I've survived 25 years without doing that, and I would like to go into my 26th and 27th year without that occurring.
Fire Dispatch Battalion 1, start a 4th alarm assignment. Also have CHP evacuate the Capitol.
Copy. 4th alarm assignment with evacuation of the Capitol.
Dispatch Battalion 1, be advised, I'm going to need all available chief officers, all available off-duty chief officers. Also, for future assistance on command, I want you to designate 2 more TAC channels and have them standing by for command at 13th and Capitol.
EMS 1 copy. Confirm show you en route. 2 additional TAC channels for commands.
The monumental question became,
do we fight the fire? First decision, obviously, evacuate the Capitol. Second decision is, do we attack this fire? If we don't, I lose the Capitol. If we do, maybe I lose somebody. So my first sort of instinct is, gather as much information you can. Does anybody know? Did we get a phone call? Has there been a threat? Are there any other devices running around? I was constantly being fed information regarding CHP, responding with bomb dogs, the EOD unit, all those kinds of things. nobody really could confirm or deny that we didn't have a secondary device. Problem I have is my people. They're trained to be very aggressive. They're trained to attack the fire. They essentially were thinking the exact same thing I was thinking, but yet they went ahead and attacked the fire. And I must tell you, I wonder, had I called everybody off the fire scene, if I would have even been able to get the firefighters off that scene soon enough to prevent a secondary device from capturing them.
Sacramento firefighters quickly decided they were not there to stand and watch.
My first thought was, whoa, lots of fire. But secondary was potential for something very ugly because we could see that it was a big rig. We didn't know what was in the cargo. And then the tires started blowing up, so it was a little bit of a pucker factor, but a lot of fun.
We know that there's hydrants right up on the corner of the building, and those hydrants are not used very often. So I wanted to make sure that the hydrant was going to work before I connected to it. That was my big concern. So a step that I don't usually do on a fire, I went ahead and did. I checked the hydrant, flushed it, made sure that it was going to operate before I connected to it. Because sometimes, like in an arson fire, or especially in active terrorism, they will sabotage fire hydrants. So you want to make sure your hydrant works before you connect to it, otherwise you're stuck. The firefighters pulled off one 2.5, and as soon as I had the hydrant connected, I gave them water in that. And then I pulled off another 2.5 and flaked it out for the next in handline crews to use. So I just, got more lines ready for them to start using.
There had been no vandalism to the hydrants, but just getting to them had been a problem in the early reign of confusion.
I know the engines, when they started to make their leads, by then Highway Patrol had started to converge on the buildings, and not being aware of what our needs were, we had this particular engine company here tried to make the hydrant lead in a Highway Patrol car. We had to go out and find an officer. And they got out of the car, locked the car, so we had to find the officers to move the cars to make our leads to the hydrants.
CHP was there, but they had blocked our entrance, and we had to have them exit out of the way. And then I asked them to do crowd control. As I saw the vehicle, I decided I would just make a charge for it. It looked like I had a few minutes to make a difference between the Capitol burning and not, so I went for it.
I don't know that there was any formal decision made to attack the fire, but I think we all just went after it. We just, I don't know, the afterthought of having possibly been a bomb on there was kind of forgotten when you saw how many people were involved in that building and trying to get away. So it was a tough call. It really was.
The inferno raging, Captain Behringer did a quick eyeball of the truck.
Just visually, I started at the cab and worked my way back through the truck load. I mean, it was obvious after I started to survey it, the back of the cab that had been, or not the cab, but the box had been involved in enough fire where it was pretty well opened up so I could see into it, and I could see the cargo at that time was all condensed milk. It was laying all over the ground too, open and spilled, but that didn't mean that there wasn't something else in there, but I did, I surveyed as well as I could.
It was about this time, too, it became very apparent the big rig's driver was very dead.
We had a leg that was visible, and it was charred to the bone. We entered with our lines from both sides so that if that would have made a difference, if it would have blown out the back, we would have had some kind of little bit of buffer. As soon as we got lines down and started making an attack on the fire, I walked around through the main entrance on the west side of the steps and went inside, and there were large groups standing around talking at that time, even though CHP was trying to move them on. So they were rather slow about evacuating themselves.
But once lawmakers saw the inferno lapping all the way to the top of the Capitol, most got religion and moved quickly out of harm's way.
It really wasn't the lawmakers causing the problems. It was the media who were literally and figuratively crawling all over the backs of dispatchers and firefighters.
South side of the state capitol.
This had become a major event, not just in Sacramento, but also worldwide. and it was really heightened on scene because camera crews were already there covering the special session of the legislature.
The media was there before we were, and as we drove up and I spotted the hydrant and jumped out, I had cameramen over my shoulder the whole time we were working, and they were actually, I was watching them because Sue and John were pulling their line up towards the fire, and I was making my hydrant connection, and the tires were popping, and it was, you know, kind of nerve-wracking. And to have this cameraman over my shoulder, and they were actually going from bush to bush, you know, like you would see in a war zone or something. These cameramen are scurrying along the ground, going from bush to bush, trying to get in there, and it was just kind of, I was aware of this out of the corner of my eyes, watching this going, oh no, how are we going to get these people out of here?
We knew CHP was on scene, and we did know the legislature was in session, but we knew that they would control crowd. We were more concerned, at least I was, once we got in there starting to fight the fire, was the reporters following us in unprotected. We had one reporter follow us right up next to the foyer, which was flashing over and flames probably 30 feet. I told him, you know, get out of our way, and, you know, it's not a safe place to be, but we can't really restrict the press's view. We hope that they are being a little more cautious, but we've learned through experience that they're going to go where they're going to go.
Did they listen to you in this case?
Yes.
They did once we started getting physical with them, actually trying to move them back, because they weren't paying attention to the order of, you know, leave the scene. So we kind of had to push them along.
Communications dispatch was being deluged with media calls, some from around the world and some who just wouldn't go away.
Los Angeles were calling in on our emergency number, and we were not able to communicate well enough to him that they were tying up an emergency line for press information. And he was adamant about getting the PIO's number, and seriously didn't believe me that I didn't have it at my fingertips at that moment. And I think he probably called about 8 or 9 times on an emergency line to get that telephone number.
This was the largest media event I've ever seen. I think every PIO should have that experience. But it became a large problem right off the bat because of the fact that we had live coverage for the energy crisis. Well, that put the immediate word out worldwide, basically, that there was a truck that had gone into the Capitol. We had no time to get set up and just worry about our local coverage. We had wide coverage from the get-go. That created a problem because our dispatchers, they were probably 15 minutes into the call when they started receiving phone calls from media people from Chicago, New York, all over the United States, wanting information on what was going on.
With videographers almost riding on their shoulders, Sacramento firefighters went about the business of knocking down the fire.
We actually got to the cab pretty early on, but it took us as soon as we got our lines down, we were able to come around and get to the cab. Actually, it wasn't that it was so hot, it was the location of the cab. It was up on the sidewalk, and the side that we were able to enter from, you had to actually do some acrobatics to get up there. You had to climb up some stairs and get up on the sidewalk. I could see the diesel running out from under the rig, and the flames were primarily around the cab of the rig. I thought that it was from the initial impact and from maybe the fuel burning as well.
The fury with which the rig had hit between the two arches had allowed the cab to nose into the Capitol.
We went in through the large double doors and opened the other door was right next to it where the cab had entered. Opened that door, and so the smoke came from the room and also from us, from the exterior, and filled the Capitol pretty quickly, actually.
Once you go to truck 5, get their hydraulic blower and their portable blowers, set up on the west steps at those doors, set up on the north steps of those doors, and start blowing this thing to the south. Yeah, we just set up fans on the west wall and return from the interior. We've got about 1.5 inches of water running on the ground floor here. Sprinklers are still running in the room where the truck entered, and we got light smoke in that end of the building.
I suppose the most challenging was making the decision to fight the fire or pull back. that just the decision in itself, but it was made in just a matter of split seconds. Chief Terry asked, I believe he asked me if I thought it was intentional. I said it was definitely intentional.
In actuality, knocking down the fire turned out to be perhaps the one aspect of this incredible night that pretty much went by the book.
What was being used to fight the fire itself? Anything other than water?
Initially, the fire attack was made with water. We were concerned about an exposure. I mean, a fire officer in that kind of situation writes off the truck. So that's really not an issue. So initially, what we're trying to do is prevent the fire from spreading into the building, also to protect ingress and egress. So if we've got areas where people may be coming out, we want to protect those areas. So initially, we did an attack with water. It's the fastest, it's the most efficient way to attack the fire. Then as we started gathering information that we did have a flammable liquefier, thank God it was diesel as opposed to gasoline, we did attempt to start using some foam. But that was more in a situation where we were at an extinguishment level as opposed to an attack rescue mode.
We got to it quick. We put it out in no time at all, and actually it went real easy. It was pretty much out before everything else started getting involved, you know.
Yeah, we were real happy that there wasn't a lot of damage into the Capitol. The access that the gentleman who was driving the truck took, he ended up just barely into one room. If he'd have gone through the main doors, we'd have had a whole nother scenario.
We don't have a lot, but we do have an open diesel fuel tank here. I'd like to get some foam down if we can. So we're making good headway on the fire. It's mostly tire smoke at this point. For being advised, I did ask for a bomb squad. Do you have any idea of being able to tell whether or not you have any explosives? I don't know if you caught my earlier report. Most of this is canned goods, and the bulk of what it is canned milk. Dispatch command, be advised, we're getting a good knockdown on this. We're getting a good knockdown.
Copy, good knockdown.
The knockdown was successful relatively quickly, all things considered, and as you might imagine, a palpable sigh of relief went through Sacramento Emergency Services.
In addition to a flying wedge of news media, lawmakers, and onlookers, the fire department was also dealing with an alphabet soup of other agencies.
It was difficult for us because we were responsible for the fire, but we were getting instructions from, we'd walk, a line around and they'd tell us to exit, or we're not supposed to be there or whatever, and the fire wasn't even completely extinguished. So it was difficult for us. I think maybe they could have had a bannered area and just let us do our job within that area, but there were different agencies disagreeing among themselves, and it did make it difficult for us. I'm not sure what their capacity was. We had CDF, ATF, all kinds of agencies, and they were mainly arguing among themselves as far as whose jurisdiction or who was in control of the scene, and we're pretty humble about that. We just want to put the fire out, and we'll be happy to leave anytime you want us to. But I initially started thinking about overhaul and salvage early on, and that was frustrating because their main concern was securing the evidence, as they were calling it at the time. So we had the heads pop off and water down, and I was thinking, I'm not sure these tiles look like they could be valuable or whatever. Those were frustrations, but I suppose those are probably minor.
Well, it was both complicated and effective. When you get an incident that large, with that much noteworthiness that quickly, it's, for lack of a better term, organized chaos. Then you start with things like CHP, CDF, California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, because they may or may not have jurisdiction regarding being at the state capitol building. The FBI was here quickly, the Sheriff's Department was here quickly, all kinds of other agencies that would be involved, Department of General Services from the state of California, who sort of owns and manages the building. And when you have that kind of thing, then the layered agency response becomes more complicated to coordinate.
And it was complicated. The California Highway Patrol is responsible for protection of the Capitol grounds. The sergeants at arms are responsible for protecting their respective senators and assemblymen. Sacramento PD, of course, handles the areas surrounding the Capitol. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Marshal dealt with the cause and origin. And of course, because of a possible terrorist attack, FBI, DEA, and ATF.
We made it clear the ATF was there to support CHP and the fire marshals in the scene investigation, in that we would provide our expertise, our agents, our equipment to help them do what we call the cause and origin of that type of scene. In addition, what we have to consider is the external issues as well. For every bomb that might get delivered to the Capitol, it had to have been made somewhere. It had to have been transported somewhere, and so we have an investigation to conduct externally as well. So that was what we initially set about doing. It was difficult only in that we were outdoors, away from the scene for safety's sake. There was a lot of people, onlookers, a lot of press, and actually finding the key people that were going to be decision makers was a little difficult. And I didn't know personally, the Deputy Commissioner of the Highway Patrol. I didn't know who some of the folks were, so we had to get together and introduce ourselves. The only issue that really came up was whether or not the State Fire Marshal was in charge of the cause and origin, or CHP was going to be in charge. There was real, to my information, no confusion as to what needed to be done. It was just going to be who was going to be designated the lead agency.
In the efforts to find where all the different entities, PIOs were, the CHP, ATF, FBI, and all those people, it was difficult because nobody had gone to one central location where the command post was, which was our command post. Hopefully, I was hoping that everybody would meet at our command post, and then we could leave from there and go take care of what we needed to do. But everybody was still basically doing their own thing. And then once things settled down some, then the PIOs were able to get together. And we worked very well together, especially the first night. All of our press conferences were done jointly. The CHP would talk, the fire department would talk, FBI would talk, and whatever other organization there who felt they needed to talk, they would go ahead and say their piece. And it was a very well done event.
Still, while some in charge were getting to know one another for the first time, Sacramento firefighters had no time to do anything but get acquainted with a potentially very dangerous inferno.
I think that in this incident, and it probably can't be said enough, the coordination or the work that the initial firefighters did on this was tremendous. It was amazing. It was heroic.
I think we did a really good job. I mean, we got right in there and aggressively fought the fire. Every fire is different, and the potential for danger is always there, and you can never tell what the heck's going on. But I felt real happy about what we did.
Sacramento firefighters were also able to use the Capitol Fire as a great way to test their incident dispatch team.
The concept was begun by the San Jose Fire Department. It groups dispatchers with special critical skills to assist at fire scenes.
IDT is an incident dispatch team, and it's a group of dispatchers who have some specialized training in some areas of ICS, which is the incident command structure, and some mutual and automatic aid training in order to work well with other agencies that may come into our jurisdiction during fire or medical emergencies.
Under this system, dispatchers with the skill sets literally go on the scene.
My responsibility when I first got there was to assess the amount of equipment that was on the scene, to get an accurate count of who was there, and also to get an idea of what their job duties were, whether it be rehab or staging or medical group, any of those areas. I develop a map, so to speak, of the area, where the equipment's at, and then I start out by getting the correct TAC channels selected up and monitoring the TAC channels. On the scene, the dispatcher has a more visual of what's going on. They're able to look around and kind of get a better understanding of what's going on. In an isolated area such as the communications center, you don't have that visual. The other side to that is that we take the emergency operations portion of that incident away from the dispatchers, away from the comm center, so that they can focus on the emergencies that still continue to come in on a regular basis. Other emergencies continue to happen even though we have a major incident.
Meg 13, code 3, engine 11, code 2, domestic dispute. Woman fell from a vehicle 5 to 10 miles per hour. Italian, 1 engine 105, medic 101, vehicle accident, Fair Oaks Boulevard, Howe Avenue, fire map 171, D. David 2.
I think it was a tremendous impact, mainly because the incident commander in this situation asked for the incident dispatch team before we were ever deployed or ever got to the point where we would be deployed. So they're recognizing the fact that we are a valuable tool and a resource that can be utilized in a situation like that to help him get his job done a lot better.
Perhaps the most amazing, frightening aspect of this incident was the fact that one person bent on destruction could cause so much. Although he'd grown up in comfortable surroundings in Southern California, 37-year-old Mike Bauer's life had become a hellish existence marred by repeated stays in jail, prison, and state mental hospitals.
This was a man who had several prior involuntary incarcerations in several state mental institutes. In addition, he had communicated written communications with certain members of elected officials of the state of California government, and we were privy to some of those communications. He was a man who was having some real issues mentally, and now he had an 18-wheeler under him.
It wasn't until late the afternoon after the crash, Bauer's body, burned beyond recognition, was removed from the charred remains of the truck.
Be advised, the driver of the vehicle is inside the cab and is deceased.
His assignment that last day had been to pick up a load of condensed milk at a Nestle's Carnation facility in Modesto, California, and deliver it to South Dakota. But for whatever reason, he went only as far as Sacramento, where witnesses said he circled the Capitol several times, blaring his horn before roaring up and crashing into the building. On one of his biceps was tattooed the phrase, "New World Order." Bowers never explained what it meant, although law enforcement says typically New World Order is the name anti-government groups use to label an alleged conspiracy among governments to coalesce under the final leadership of the United Nations.
My main goal had been to give a good size up as I arrived. There was a news media van right in front of our hydrant where we positioned ourselves. And as I gave my size up, it was unreadable, and you couldn't understand what I was saying. It sounded like garble. And later on they determined that it was probably from the dish of the news media. And the third time I repeated, for some reason it was just crystal clear. But the other two sounded like garble. And so I'm not sure if the van had moved at that point or what had taken place exactly, but that was a concern. There were some things that we could have done. We never did hook up to the standpipes that were there. We could have taken lines in through the west entrance up the stairs. We could have gotten a wide line in or lines in to attack from the entrance. We never did get lines from the entrance in place, had it extended and really got going. If we fought the fire again, we should have taken lines through the west entrance and been prepared for whatever might have happened.
We might have made a more definite attempt to go to the sprinkler connections a little sooner, to start thinking about the sprinklers, and actually carrying some more hand lines inside the building a little sooner than we did. Because when we first got there, our main point of attack was the fire on the exterior of the building, and it took a few minutes before we started getting lines inside the building and thinking about the connections.
As I got off the rig and started moving my lines, I was frustrated initially also, I have to say, because I didn't have folks to help us with our hand lines fast enough. It seemed like it took a little while to get people in position. But I was very pleased with the fact that as soon as we got people there, we worked together as though we've worked together for years, which we have. These crews that work together downtown. It's almost like we read each other's minds and we played off of each other very well. I was very impressed by that. After I looked back at it, I was thinking about how we just gelled together, and it was very good.
We have a rather in-depth notification process for the city fire department on second and third alarms. We've been able to automate that for the county. We're still working on trying to get it automated for the city. So there's a lot of telephone intervention for a notification process, which again kind of ties the hands of the dispatchers trying to work a radio and do a telephone notification process as well. So we're hoping in the future to get that automated.
What I came away with more than anything is the fine line between making the decision of whether to attack the fire or whether to back away and concern yourself with the possible, the circumstances being the state capitol. There was every indication that could have been a terrorist attack, and to rush in there with my crew, to handle that as a typical truck fire, I mean, you just couldn't. That was just out of the question, and the concern of being a possible terrorist attack was very much on my mind.
Once the fire was extinguished, we established what we call unified command. And unified command in that particular situation would be fire, Sac City Fire, CHP, Assembly Sergeant at Arms, Senate Sergeant at Arms, California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, California Office of Emergency Services, and the California Department of General Services. That's up to 7, and there are probably other agencies, the FBI because of potential terrorist attack. So you're talking 10 agencies with all their various representatives being there in what we call a joint unified command. The theory is a cooperative, collaborative working environment. Sometimes the theory works better in theory than it does in practice. But I would say, all things considered, I would give us a grade of at least a B+ in functioning as a multi-agency operation. When you do your after-action report, when you critique your organization for small incidents, don't be afraid to be a little bit self-critical. There are a number of things in the after-action report that I, as an incident commander, could have taken personally and said, oh, gee, I'd be a little bit skittish about being criticized about one thing or another. I have never responded to an incident in my 25-year career, from a garbage can fire all the way to the 4-alarm fire at the state capitol, that I didn't think later about something I could have done differently or perhaps better. I would suggest that my distribution of resources may have been able to have been done better. I ended up moving the staging location. The original staging location ended up being downwind from the smoke. That's a tactical error on my part. I ended up having to move it.
Dispatch Battalion 1, be advised, due to the wind change, I am changing the staging location. I'm going to be on the N Street, in North Street, between 9th and 10th.
On N North Street between 9th and 10th due to wind change.
We need to plan ahead. We need to have the coordination, the contacts in place so that we know who we all are and what all of our responsibilities are. I think that any fire department, any law enforcement agency that's looking in their city, in their jurisdiction, should probably be looking at some government buildings. Sadly, this isn't going to go away. Government buildings are a viable target for disgruntled, mentally ill, or domestic terrorists or criminals. And so they need to be thinking about their game plan on that day. How are they going to address that? Can they prevent it?
You better have a plan written down, rehearsed, and drilled for these types of incidents. My opinion, this fire chief's opinion, number one problem with that incident, communications. And it seems to permeate large incidences, communications. All those agencies that I just talked to you about, 10 of them, are all on different radio channels and all on different tactical channels and all talking over one another or around one another. And this agency decides to make this decision, which another agency has already decided to make, and somebody's already doing it. Now you have 2 agencies going to do the same thing, so you have duplication of resources. And what happens then is probably something that should be done is not being done by somebody else.
A problem that we had at hand was not having the PIO number quickly at hand that we could refer those numbers. And that's a mistake that I've rectified. That I'll always have that number handy.
We had no time to get set up and just worry about our local coverage. That created a problem because our dispatchers, they were probably 15 minutes into the call when they started receiving phone calls from media people from Chicago, New York, all over the United States, wanting information on what was going on. And at that point, our dispatchers are just getting into the 4th alarm on this fire. They've got numerous pieces of apparatus and equipment responding, plus they're trying to handle all the staff issues and the move-ups, and they're trying to handle the media too. The media wanted to know what was going on. Our dispatchers did not have the time to explain that to them. They wanted the PIO's number, how they could get a hold of the PIO. The PIO was committed on scene with the media that was there. He didn't have time to handle all these other incoming phone calls and stuff, so that made it very tough. And then once things settled down some, then the PIOs were able to get together, and we worked very well together, especially the first night. All of our press conferences were done jointly. The CHP would talk, the fire department would talk, FBI would talk, and whatever other organization there who felt they needed to talk, they would go ahead and say their piece. They need to have a backup PIO, because I went home at 4 in the morning. Our next conference was at 7, so I got up at 6 and I'm back here by 7. So you're running on an hour-and-a-half nap. It's not a sleep. You go home, you shower, you come back, and you're back at it for another day. You need to have backup. You need to have more than one PIO. You need to have somebody that knows what's been going on. That's something that every PIO should go through. That amount of media was quite amazing. I know at one point I was talking to a couple of different cameras, and when I was done, I was so wrapped up in what I was doing and telling them, I didn't realize that I had cameras 360 degrees around me, and I went to leave and there was no place to go because I was completely encircled with cameras, microphones, and media.
That's our first edition of In the Line of Fire. Many, many thanks to Captain Don Brazil and all the troops of the Sacramento Fire Department and the Sacramento ATF for their tremendous cooperation. I'm Ron Barber.
And I'm Don Marsh. Many of you will probably have questions about the fire or the knockdown or everything in between or since. We'll make every attempt to answer those questions for you. Simply email us or call us and we'll make every attempt to answer all your questions.
Finally, our next edition of In the Line of Fire is hot off the presses and you won't want to miss it. An on-scene commander's decision to pull his firefighters from inside a burning video store probably saves up to 20 lives. See the incredible story and hear the firefighters involved. In the Line of Fire. Simply fill out and fax or mail the enclosed sheet. St. Paul Fire, tragedy averted.
Thanks for watching, and remember, next time we may be watching you in the line of fire.